Yeah, I mean, we suck right now, so I don't. Pretty shocked. Obviously we had a great offseason, great training camp, and we got to figure it out. So
the Jacksonville Jaguars are such a disaster that I don't think this team could be saved with just one major move, particularly in the middle of the season. Fans don't even know who to point the blame finger at this point. Is it Trevor Lawrence's fault? Is it Doug Peterson's fault? Is it Press Taylor's fault? Why does the defense suck so much? Is it the general manager's fault? I mean, there's so many individuals that you can point the blame finger on. So before we get to the content, we are on the grind to 1 million subscribers. Make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help us get there. Now that we get all that out of the way, break. Over $1,000 playing Prize Picks over the past week. We hit on Thursday night and on Sunday, and I would have hit a third time if Aaron Jones didn't get injured. Fortunately, Prize Picks refunds you when a player gets injured. I give away my picks for free on Instagram and now on Snapchat. And make sure you use my promo code Mikerophone to get a free $50 when you make a lineup of $5 or more. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? When the NFL schedule makers decided to make this schedule and decide which teams play in London, they had no idea that the Jacksonville Jaguars were going to be this terrible. I mean, when the schedule was made, it was supposed to be Trevor Lawrence, the last transcendent #1 overall pick, the greatest quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck, versus Caleb Williams, this year's transcendent #1 overall pick, the next coming of Patrick Mahomes. And so far, both teams got off to bumpy starts. In the case of Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears, on paper, this team was perfect. They went out and traded for Keenan Allen in the offseason. They got DJ Moore after fleecing the Carolina Panthers. They drafted Rome Odunze in the first round. They signed DeAndre Swift, and they were building a solid defense. The foundation was there, but there were some issues in regards to the offense. There's questions of whether or not Shane Waldron would be the right offensive coordinator for this team, and Jackson Smith-Njigba made this very clear over the offseason.
Shane Waldron, what can you tell him about who they just hired to try to get this offense where it needs to go?
This is live?
Yeah, we're not live. We're not live.
I'm playing. Good luck to y'all. I mean, he's a great person, great offensive coordinator. I was very lucky to have him.
And towards the beginning of the season, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you took a look at JSN's route tree from last year when Shane Waldron was the Seahawks offensive coordinator versus how his route tree looked once they moved on from Shane Waldron, and then compare that to DJ Moore when he had Luke Getsy as his offensive coordinator, and then compared it to DJ Moore's game against the LA Rams with Waldron, you can kind of understand where the problems were for the Chicago Bears. That on top of the fact that the offensive line isn't necessarily one of the greatest offensive lines in the NFL, and you could come up with a very legitimate reason as to why Caleb Williams didn't get off to the strongest start of the season until he faced off against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. I mean, the start of the Jacksonville Jaguars season was very brutal to say the least, with Trevor Lawrence opening up the season by saying this.
Trevor, how stunned are you by the offensive performance in the last 6 quarters?
Yeah, I mean, we suck right now, so I don't. Pretty shocked. Obviously we had a great offseason, great training camp, and we got to figure it out. So,
but if you take a look at the performance that the Jaguars had against the Chicago Bears, every single issue that the Jaguars have had so far this season came to the surface on this one particular London game versus the Chicago Bears. And it was so bad that Andre Sisco said something dastardly after the game.
Oh, was it as bad as it felt and looked?
How should I say this? A lot of quit. In a situation like that, you could feel, and felt very early in the game that we weren't playing as one. Like, there's no excuse for lack of effort. Like, that's literally the least you could do, is come out and give effort.
I mean, where do we begin? Do we point the blame finger at Trevor Lawrence? Because after all, Trevor Lawrence missed his wide receiver on this particular 2nd and 5 on a pass that would have without a doubt been a touchdown to Zay Jones. And Trevor Lawrence has a history of being inaccurate. What about the fact that Trevor Lawrence threw this interception in the beginning of the 4th quarter? So could we say that the reason why the Jacksonville Jaguars stink is because it's versus Trevor Lawrence. At the same time, Trevor Lawrence made some remarkable throws as well, and this won't show up on the stat sheet either. But he had a pass thrown to Christian Kirk that would have without a doubt been a touchdown, but Christian Kirk dropped it. He had a pass to Zay Jones thrown in the end zone that was dropped by Zay Jones. On a crucial 3rd and 1, he had a pass thrown to Gabe Davis right on the money that was dropped, although granted this was in garbage time. But probably the most important one here was in the very beginning of the game when there was still momentum on 3rd and goal. Trevor Lawrence throws a rocket right to Gabe Davis's hands, who drops it in the end zone. Having this occur to you 4 times in one particular game is insane, particularly when it's in the beginning of the drive. I mean, these are some remarkable throws that Trevor is making consistently. I don't know if I could 100% say this is Trevor Lawrence's fault. In the past, I've had this take about the Jacksonville Jaguars making a horrific mistake keeping Trent Baalke as the general manager of the team. And I felt this way for a very long time. I said this when they hired Doug Peterson as their head coach. We made a video on it 2 years ago, the very video that we discussed Doug Peterson getting hired as a head coach. I said that the Jaguars made a horrific mistake by not firing Trent Baalke. This is the guy that the San Francisco 49ers chose over Jim Harbaugh, who had a horrific track record drafting for the San Francisco 49ers, and once again has a horrific track record drafting for the Jacksonville Jaguars. To give you an idea of how terrible Trent Baalke was with the San Francisco 49ers, here's a chart via 49ersNation.com that shows each and every pick that he's ever taken and what ended up happening to these players. Now, some of these current statuses are obviously not up to date because this is a chart from a couple years ago, but you can see for the most part, he hasn't really hit on a lot of his picks. The only players I really recognize on this list is Colin Kaepernick, Aldon Smith, Arik Armstead, DeForest Buckner, and that's about it. And if you take a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars' current draft history, you can once again say that he did a horrific job drafting. I mean, yes, you select Trevor Lawrence with the #1 overall pick in the 2021 NFL draft. And then for some reason, despite having James Robinson on the roster, who was still performing really well, you decided to take Travis Etienne with your additional 1st-round pick over drafting an offensive lineman like Landon Dickerson, who ended up becoming a Pro Bowler for the Philadelphia Eagles. In 2022, he famously took Travon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson, which Travon Walker isn't bad at all whatsoever. The hope was Travon Walker would be able to be a run stopper and an effective pass rusher, and he's a solid pass rusher and a pretty decent run stopper, but he hasn't been a Pro Bowler, and you can't really build a defense around Travon Walker, whereas the Detroit Lions built a defense around Aiden Hutchinson. I will admit their pick of Devin Lloyd was a very solid pick in 2022 with their 2nd first-round pick, but in 2023 they drafted a bust once again in the form of Anton Harrison. They hit on Tank Bigsby, which is even more evidence that they shouldn't have drafted Travis Etienne. And this past year, I will admit, so far Brian Thomas looks like the real deal. But it's not only the NFL draft that frustrated me with Trent Baalke, it's the way he decided to invest his additional cap space to build around Trevor Lawrence. I've mentioned it multiple times on this YouTube channel in the past. Whenever you have a quarterback of Trevor Lawrence's caliber or a young franchise QB and you're trying to develop their confidence, it's important to surround that franchise QB with trustworthy options at the wide receiver position. And throughout the Trent Baalke era, we got players like Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Zay Jones, which are all solid wide receiver 2s in my opinion, but none of these are wide receiver 1s. Like, if you take a look at what the Cardinals did, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins for Kyler Murray's 2nd year. The Cowboys traded for Amari Cooper to help out Dak Prescott. The Bills traded for Stephon Diggs, and even the Texans would go ahead and trade for Stephon Diggs to make CJ Stroud even more comfortable, even though he clearly didn't need it. You've seen this time and time again in the NFL, but for some reason, Trent Baalke never did it. So you could also point the blame finger at the general manager for the Jacksonville Jaguars thus far. But the biggest problem so far has to be coaching. Doug Peterson has been terrible so far. And the reason I'm pointing the blame finger at Doug Peterson is because he made the exact same mistake he did before that cost him his job in Philadelphia in the form of hiring this guy. For those of you guys that don't know who this is Press Taylor. Press Taylor was the Philadelphia Eagles QB coach and passing game coordinator in 2020. This was the year that Doug Peterson would lose his job. This was the season that Carson Wentz became a shell of his former self. And for some reason, in 2022, Doug Peterson decided to bring him back as his offensive coordinator, despite him being one of the worst offensive coaches coaches in the NFL. And it's not only the offense that's been terrible so far, it's the defense as well. You can see how this is a beautiful sandwich, right? Because currently the Jacksonville Jaguars rank 31st in total defense, 30th in points allowed, and they have the 21st ranked scoring offense as well. And Doug Peterson's running out of answers. I mean, look at what he said after the team dropped to 0-4.
My status?
After an 0-4 start.
I mean, no. I mean, it's kind of a strange question, but okay.
And look at what he says when you ask him about their defense.
Your defense, too, the Bears really got rolling there in the second quarter. Yeah, I mean, we got to keep playing. We've had a couple of coverage assignments, and those are things that have kind of plagued us all season so far, and we got to get in here, clean that up, and, just execute better.
And that's the thing. A part of you wonders whether firing Doug Peterson is going to solve anything, but this team has so many problems from so many different angles that you really can't fix it with one move. You fire Press Taylor or Doug Peterson and your team still has a terrible defense. You move on from Trent Baalke and you can't really make any moves until the offseason, although I think it's a step in the right direction. You already extended Trevor Lawrence, and I don't think that was a bad move at all whatsoever, because he's a very talented quarterback, believe it or not. He's just not in a good position to succeed. The craziest part of all is Doug Peterson pretty much put himself on the hot seat after the game, coming out and saying that we play a 17-game schedule, so we've got a few games left. Nobody's going to feel sorry for us. We've got to change. I say we, it's all of us, coaches, players, everybody. We've got to change right now that culture. Otherwise, it gets out of control. We're on a slippery slope or right on the cusp of that slope. At some point, we've got to say enough is enough, and you've got to have enough pride and figure out a way. And it's just kind of crazy because every single time a team wants to make a cultural change or reset the culture of any franchise, typically the top thing that they do is fire their head coach. So for the head coach to come out here and say that we need a cultural reset pretty much is Doug Peterson putting himself on the hot seat. And obviously, there's no question about it. He is on the hot seat, especially when there's clear upgrades available during the offseason. I mean, Bill Belichick is still a free agent, for crying out loud. And it's not just Bill Belichick. Mike Vrabel's available. Bobby Slowick of the Texans is available. Ben Johnson was nearly the Washington Commanders head coach this past year before deciding to return to the Lions for another season. I mean, Brian Flores certainly boosted his prospects as a head coach once again after turning the Minnesota Vikings into one of the top defenses in the NFL. It's just there's so many upgrades available that if you do need a cultural reset, there's no question about it. The Jacksonville Jaguars would move on from Doug Peterson. The question is when they would do it. I don't think the solution is to do it in the middle of the season. This will be something that I would think is better to take place at the end of the season, because right now your offensive coordinator isn't going to be a gigantic upgrade and your defensive coordinator certainly isn't going to be a big upgrade either. So if you're a Jaguars fan, let me know in the comment section down below, what should the Jaguars do to salvage their season? Is their season even salvageable? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.